64 people are now known to have died in a massive fire at a shopping centre in the Siberian city of Kemerovo. Many of the victims are children. Nearly 300 firefighters battled to contain the blaze. As Andrew Plant reports, the fire broke out in the Winter Cherry Mall while it was packed with Sunday shoppers.
A fire on the 4th floor. This shopping centre surrounded by firefighters searching for survivors, trying to reach upper floor windows, fighting the smoke billowing outside. The fire started here on Sunday. Dozens were evacuated, but it was clear dozens more were missing, many of them children.
The area of the fire is about 1,500 square metres. At this moment, 288 emergency officers are working on site, as well as 62 units of equipment and an airborne grouping are taking part in the search and rescue operation. We are taking all necessary measures to extinguish the fire. The shopping centre has a very complex construction. There is a lot of combustible materials.
People gathered to stand and stare as the fire unfolded. Witnesses said it trapped people on the upper floors and said some had jumped from windows to try to escape from the flames. An industrial city of more than 500,000, it is one of Russia's biggest coal-producing regions, more than 2,000 kilometres east of Moscow. Already there are reports the fire began near a cinema and children's entertainment centre. President Putin has already sent his condolences to friends and family of the victims. Authorities say a criminal investigation will now begin to try to find out what caused the fire. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
Let's go over to Paul Adams in Moscow. And Paul, terrible events, the number of dead dramatically rising over the course of the last few hours.
Yeah, it has, particularly just the few hours of this morning, from only about 30 overnight to now in excess of 60, we believe. The number of missing, which was also very high at one point, seems to have come down quite a bit. So it may be that we are reaching a final conclusion on the number of dead. One of the problems is that part of the roof of the complex collapsed, which has made it very difficult for firefighters to access the upper floors of the mall. So I think it may be some time before we get a complete picture of how many people died. In the meantime, of course, an investigation is getting underway. There have already been some detentions. People have been questioned, people who are connected with the ownership of the complex and those also who were renters of shops within the complex. In fact, in the last hour or so on the TASS news agency, we heard that one of those detained was indeed a renter of an area close to what is believed to be the point where the fire began. The trouble is, people don't quite know exactly where it began yet. One theory is that it may have been in or near one of the cinemas. Another theory that it could have been in a children's play area. Also reports that the children were unattended. There's been some awful graphic footage from inside the mall showing, in one case, desperate people trying to batter down a fire door which appears to be locked. So an awful lot for investigators to try and get their heads around.
And Paul, you mentioned children. There are so many child casualties among the dead.
Yeah, this was the start of the holiday, the school holiday. It was also the middle of Sunday, an area a complex that has cinemas, a bowling alley, a children's play area, even we're told a petting zoo. And so tragically, I think it was the whole complex was absolutely crammed yesterday, and an awful lot of those people will have been children.
And Paul, presumably a lot of questions now being asked about the construction of this building and why something like this was allowed to take hold and how it took hold so very quickly.
Yeah, as you heard in that report, a lot of combustible materials inside. The smoke that came pouring out of the windows was thick and black. So clearly the fire inside must have been very intense. We've heard of people receiving carbon monoxide poisoning. The investigators are understood to be wanting to speak to the owner of the complex. Now, he is a billionaire who lives in Australia, we believe. So it's not clear whether they're going to be able to get to him to speak to him. It's thought that the ownership of the complex is a somewhat complex affair. And the question's already being raised about exactly what you ask, the fire standards, the escapes and so forth. I think it's fair to say that, particularly in that part of Russia, in Siberia, the record in recent years has shown that these things are not always properly regulated and that fires do sometimes have far more tragic consequences than they ought.
Paul, thank you very much. Paul Adams there in Moscow, reporting on events in Kemerovo in Siberia.